Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth installment of our serverless Android app application tutorial guide. Today, we're going to be defining the rest of our application's schema for its data and the objects that we are going to use. And after that, we will start setting up the final login and register process, making use of those objects and also making use of our new cloud database manager and authentication managers that we have written in previous episodes. Well, without further ado, I think let's get into it. So, if you remember from the last sort of couple of weeks now, really, we've got a couple of different managers in place. We have our cloud manager, which right now is just handling this user object, which we have as a defined object that is part of the cloud database. And that's just literally just a username, an ID, and a UID. So we've definitely got some additional stuff to be done there, but that's where it is at the moment. And the cloud manager is handling all the management of that. So, like being able to upsert users and what have you. Now, obviously, this needs to change. We need to make this more generic. We need to take a look at making this work for any object type, which we will do once we've defined those objects. And we should be able to get it to a point where everything is fairly generic. I don't think we're going to have any kind of object specific methods. I don't think. We'll see. There might be a little bit of experimenting going on there. And then we've got the Authentication Manager. And this is what's been handling our auth service and the logging in of our application, and then handling that process to get the user from the cloud database and also set the user if they're registering. And we're going to take that a little bit further as well, so we can actually do something with the user and actually log in. I think we need to kind of finish the login process with a logout process as well and do that kind of fun stuff. So there's definitely a lot of code that needs to be done. And other than that, we've got our kind of main activity and our register activity, which just displays the very basic login screen and the very basic registration screen. As we've said before, we're not winning design awards in this kind of tutorial series. We are very much focused on the logic and coding side. So if you are here for design tutorials, you need to look elsewhere, because that ain't happening. I'll tell you that for sure. Okay, so let's dig into the database schema. We want to have a think about, well, what are we actually going to need in our schema? And how is that going to be represented in the cloud database in a way that we can then use it as Java objects as well? So if we head over to the web screen, here's one I prepared earlier. You can see our current object type, which is just user. And you can see that, as we've said in the Java object, there really isn't much information in that. You've got the ID, you've got the UID, which is the ID that the auth service gives us, and you've got the username. Now, in the fullness, a user is going to have an awful lot more information set to them. We'll add a few extra columns into this now because we know there's going to be some. So, for example, we know that your user should really have a name as well. But that will be a display name. We're not really interested in like their proper name or anything like that. We don't need that. But I think if we're thinking in the context of Twitter, which is what we are thinking in the context of, you have a username, which is your handle, but you then also have a display name, which is the name that actually, you guessed it, displays on your profile. So we're going to want that. And we're also going to want a description, so a user can add some information about themselves. And we'll probably also limit that as well. We need to apply some formatting and some limiting logic to make sure that user can't just put like 100,000 like the works of Shakespeare in as their description and break the app. So let's make sure we do that as well. So we're going to start by modifying this user and get that set up, and then we need to think about the other kind of objects that are going to exist within this app. What other things would you expect to be able to do in a, granted fairly basic, but in a basic Twitter clone? And that would obviously be creating a post, commenting on a post, and liking a post. We'll probably come up with a few more things along the way as well. So let's start here with the cloud database with the user, and we're going to modify that and get that set up. So let's monitor out a bit there. There we go. So yeah, we've got the user. These are the fields. This is where we're going to be changing stuff. So we can add in a couple of extra fields. So we're going to have display name, and that's a string, and that can't be null. Display name and then description, like so, and that can be null. You can have an empty description. There's no reason why not. And that's a string as well. And I just want to check through there. No, we definitely want that as a string. Am I being blind here? Nope. There we go. Okay. Okay, so you have to have, of course, you have to have a default value for your mandatory fields. So display name by default will just be, we will just use 0 to denote that, and we go. We've still got the one index at the moment, which is just on the ID, and that's all we actually need right now. So we'll leave that for now, and the permissions can stay the same as well. So we've just made some modifications to that object type, and that's fine. So next we want to add our next object type, and this is going to be, I think, the post. I think that makes sense. That's going to be the next most obvious thing. It's going to be a post to the social network. So what fields might you have on the post? Well, you're definitely going to have an ID for the post. That will be the primary key, and that will be an integer. Like so. Yeah, and it's also not null either. It's primary key. That's fine. Now, what field might we want on a post? I think all posts. Well, when we're talking about Twitter, posts don't have titles even, are they? It's just text, and then you can potentially have some sort of media linked to that post, can't you? So for now, we are going to focus on just having text posts. That's all you're going to have, is the ability to write some text and post it. So we will have we'll call it content, and that's the string, and that can't be null. 0. And other than that, a post has to have a user ID. You have to have a user has to be linked to a post. So we can do user ID, and we'll make that as integers. Thank you. That does make the most sense. Cool. So I think that's kind of the basics of what you would have in a post, and we can add in a number of indexes we want. So we'll have post ID, and that's going to be on ID. You can have multiple index fields, but we don't need that. And we will set that all up like so. Okay, perfect. So we're going to have, anyway, we're going to have post like, and that's ID, integer, primary key, and so you've got a user ID, and you've got a post ID, and that's that. And it's literally that's all it's going to be. Again, we can have the index on the post like ID. So, and that's fine. So that's it, that object. We'll add post comment. What do we just call it? Comment? No. Yeah, we'll just call it comment because there isn't anywhere else that you can comment. So it is a comment. It has an ID. Integer, it's primary key. Comments have content, which is what you're actually commenting. They're going to have a post ID, so what posts you are posting it, commenting against, and they're going to have a user ID, i.e., which user has made that comment. And we'll do another ID index. There we go. There we go. Okay. And so that is comments, post likes. I guess we could actually modify that and just call that like. Because again, you can't like anything else. Oh, it's not going to let me change it. I'd have to delete it. Yeah. Going to remove that and we're going to recreate it. So for like, and it's got an ID, and it's got which is an integer, and it's got a post ID, and it's got user ID. Cool. Okay. So you've got posts, you can comment and like. You then need to follow. You need to be able to follow people, don't you? So follow. And follows on Twitter are one directional. So whereas, say, on Facebook, when you friend someone, that other person has to agree to that request. On Twitter, by default, we're not talking about private profiles. That's kind of an extra feature we're not going to worry about. So by default, someone can follow someone else, and that person they're following doesn't have to approve that. And at the same time, that person they're following doesn't have to follow back. They're two separate processes. So we've only got to worry about the one direction. You've got someone that's doing the following and the person they are following. And it's one directional. So that's nice and easy. So we'll call it follow. And we'll say, again, we'll have an ID for that. And follower user ID. It's an integer. And the follower is following user ID. Integer. Cool. And I need index as well. I think for now that is our kind of our basic database schema or objects schema done, and we can now export that into Java files for Android, as we did before. So we've got the package name where we're going to keep those. We're going to export it. That's going to give us a download. which we will then over on the Android side, boop, which we will then take and is it going to let me drag them straight from there? Let's find out. No. Okay, I've got to extract it first. Fine. Show files. There we go. Yep. And we're going to override the old user model. And there we go. Cool. So we've now got everything sort of in there now. So as you can see, we've got the user with some extra fields against it now, which is great. And this will now have changed as well. So we are now adding the full list of all the different classes. And we've got these basic classes as well, all here, like so. All the different bits of information that we're going to need. Like I said, we've imported all our objects to be used. So I think the best thing we can do is kind of go through the process of using that in the registration flow and in the login flow. We'll do those as kind of two separate flows. And what we also need is a new activity. That will be the activity you see once you've logged in or registered, which I guess the best thing for that would be a feed activity, really. We would want to see the feed as the next step. So we will create a new activity. And let's just decide what the best activity will be. I think, to be honest, we could use a navigation drawer. That could be quite a nice kind of UI element. Like I said, we're not really worried about UI elements here, but yeah, I like that idea. So we're going to have that, and this is going to be called feed. And we've got the layout, Java, all good, fine and dandy. We'll let that generate. We have now created this feed activity, which is what we will go into once we've logged in or registered. Yeah. What we also do need to just do is pop back over to the web, and we need to just delete the data entries that we did have previously. User. Don't need verification. Oh yeah. So let's just delete that because we aren't going to be making use of him. We're starting fresh anyway. Okay. Now we're good. And nothing is yelling at me so far. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I see a yellow warning. I see you. Okay. Anyway, so that's all been set up so that we can play with that once we're logged in. So, naturally, we need to start with the registration process, really. We have our registration view, which at the moment potentially isn't really enough. If we have a look, we are not requiring a username or a display name. So we're going to add those in. We've got the email and the phone number purely for authentication process. Purely for authentication purposes. So we're not saving that information. That information is only going through Huawei's process, and that way we don't have to worry about storing the sensitive information, but the user can still use that as a way to identify and validate themselves. So I think that's great. I think that's the way it should be. Let's add in though 2 more fields so that we can have a username and a display name. I think that is definitely something to do. So where's our component tree? So we've got these layouts here basically. So we're going to add in some more linear layouts. And we're going to pop you there above the registration button. Yep, and I'm pretty sure that that has just a DP of 100. That's fine. Yeah, like I said, not winning any awards here, and we'll copy that as well. Not into it though. That's not right. Thank you. Then we will have text view. And the other option is we could do away with the text view and have it as a hint, couldn't we? We put email in there. That just might, yeah, I think that just looks a bit cleaner, to be honest. So let's get rid of these, rid of those, and we can have the hints instead. I think that looks cleaner. And then this one also needs 100 DP. We could actually make these much smaller now. And in fact, what we'll do is we can actually do away with those entirely. Of course we can. They can just sit below. Yeah. See, we don't need that anymore. So we can do this instead. Do away with those like that. Definitely want the width to be match parent and the height to be, I don't know, 50 dp. Layout width is match parent, and we want a couple of plain text in here. So we're going to have, how come that's name, like, go, and wait a minute, let's have that as username, like so, and we can call that username. Yep. And this one is going to be display name. Go, refactor. Cool. So why is that? Oh, is it 'cause it's got a layout weight? Probably. Yeah. That's fine. There we go. So that's a little bit more condensed as well. But that is just, it is what it is. Easier login. And then we're going to set up our new edit text here. So username and display name. And we're going to get those defined here. Edit text. Username. And pronoun. You catch up. Thank you. Edit text. Display name. Cool. So we now can capture all that information, and we can then pass that through into the authentication process. Now, how do we want to do that? I think at this point, because we are actually taking quite a lot of information. So I think what we want is to create a new type of object that we can pass through into the Authentication Manager. And we're gonna create a new modal. I think what we're also gonna do, so we're gonna change this to be, we're gonna have a package, new package, which we're gonna call database or DB, and that is all gonna go in there. so we don't kind of have the confusion. Why can't I? We'll do it this way. There we go. Now we can move this stuff into there. Have it refactored. Jobs are good. Okay. And then in new Java class, which we are going to call login data, register data, and that is not in the DB. So please move it. Thank you. And in that is where we will have the data that we're going to pass through. So we will just create a basic kind of object. So we're going to have string. We've got phone number, email, username, display name. I'm pretty sure that was all of them, wasn't it? Just those four. Yeah. And we can then create pretty sure I can do that. This is me trying to remember all the shortcuts. So we can refactor because we can generate. That's what I was looking for. And we want to generate getters and setters for all of these. Thank you. And did that in the wrong place, but that's fine. So we've got that. And we'll just create a constructor as well. That requires all those fields. Cool. That's just the bog standard simple Java object to handle that. So then in here, what we're going to do is instead of passing through because the Authentication Manager works for either login or so that's not a problem because we can. How do we want to do this? How do we want to be smart about this? Well, we'll rename it. I think for now that's the least we should do. So we'll refactor that to be login with just the data, and that way it does cover both. So here we are going to create the object here basically, and so we also need to do string capture for those. So username string equals username dot string dot brim and display name string display name string brim. Cool. And then here we can basically create the login register data, which is we're just gonna call register data because that's how we're using it. Equal new login register data, and it's phone number first, email, username, it's display name, Cool. And we are going to pass that in instead of this. In which case, as well, we can refactor this a little bit. If you can see, that really only thing changing now is the auth type. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that out. And we do have the else if. Yeah, we'll leave it for now. We'll leave it for now. So we've got, we've changed what this is using for its constructor. So let's now change that over in the Authentication Manager. And what we're basically saying is we're now expecting this login register data object as opposed to just getting a string. So like that. And we'll call that. And we are going to have a local copy of that. We are defining. So let's do that. And there's obviously going to be places where that's just not going to work. So that's fine because, so here, for example, we're sending email. So we want to get email. And here we're sending the phone. So we want the phone number. And is there anywhere else? Certainly says there is. Yep. Get email auth. That's the phone auth. So we're gonna get phone. Come on. Thank you. And same again down here. Cool. Yep. There we go. Still saying, of course. So there is also still going to be problems now in the login activity. And we can actually go ahead and fix that. So in our main activity, where it's using the constructor here, that's obviously now failing as well. And what we're actually going to do is we are going to create a new login register data here. It's going to go in here though. Like so. Going to get rid of those. And back what we can do, we are going to want to extract that into a method, generate, no, that's not right, refactor, extract method, and we're going to call that get login register data. We're going to have that. Although really, let's just do this. Like a so. Yes, I'm aware you need to return that. And I can put that in there. And as if by magic, it's all good. Cool. So we've extracted that out into its own method just because we don't need to duplicate those lines of code when they're the same in both places. In fact, as we kind of said before, we could potentially just, in fact, we definitely can extract that into its own method as well. So we're going to do that. We're going to take that. We are going to write a method. which we'll call login, and that takes a auth type, just an integer. And we're going to do this. And that's going to do that. And we're just literally going to go log me in, please, with auth type dot phone number. Egypt. Oh, hello. Okay. Bit of lag there. All right, fine. There we go. And see, writing clean code is just lovely. Way to go. So that is our login. We're deciding which type of login we're going to do. We're passing in our login register data object into the Authentication Manager, and off it goes. Now, the reason why we did that is because then here, when we are registering, we have that username information there. So we've gone through the authentication process. We've got the credentials. We have this sign-in option, and we also have this register option. So it's here. Where are we? That we in the save register user. Yep. So this is where we create the user, and then we're upserting it. So we are going to, and I'm pretty sure that's just for register, isn't it, at the moment? That's fine. So we can just add in the extra information here. So set username. That's going to be the sign in, put it login. I think I have a, yeah, I did. Egypt. There we go. Try that again. Login data dot get username and user dot display name again. Login register data dot get display name, and then we're upserting that user. So we are now registering and saving that user's information. We've got this get user method, which I don't really like. We're not actually going to use that soon, but that's done here. So we've saved, registered, and we are going to get back. Looking through, we're going to get a list of users. Now, I'm pretty sure at the moment it's then going to actually return a full list of users, which is not what we want. So let's have a look at the Cloud Manager, and we will see what it's doing and what we actually want it to do. So we process the results. So basically, on an upsert, we've upserted the user, and we are going through and saying, right, execute the task on success. Oh, actually, at the moment we're saying on success, don't do anything. So that's fine, because it's on the queries. It's just in those two places that we're executing that task, isn't it? Yeah, on the queries we're doing something different anyway. So in these instances where we're upserting a user or users, we should really just return what we've inserted. I think so, because nothing's, we're setting all the fields. we're setting all the fields. Oh, of course, yeah. So we're getting the integer. We're setting all the fields. We actually then need to refresh that as part of the upsert. I think best way to do it. Okay, so we're executing the task, but I think actually that's fine. We're executing the task, and if there is a failure, I'm just thinking about the race condition in terms of when we are updating what our maximum user ID is, and when we should update that in this sense. We should definitely do it when that's been successful. That's successfully run that task. We need to double check that our maximum user is no longer out of date. However, if it failed, we don't need to worry about that so much. Is there going to be a time where we need to update multiple users? I really don't think there is. This is kind of more there as an example for other types of objects. So we're going to not worry about that so much. And focus on this. So we're actually going to get rid of that. We don't need it right now. So we can instead, with our execute task, we can pass through the user that we are executing for. And we'll take a look and see if that's been a successful execution or not. So when it's not a successful execution, we want to use our user callback with the error message. So we're going to go user callback. Oh, wait a minute. What's our instance called? It's just callback. It's fine. And on the error, error dot replies message. In terms of if it's successful or not, if it's successful, we are going to first update the user ID, max user ID. So we're going to do that with the user. That's fine. And then we are going to return our user object back through the on add or query. So we'll do callback on add or query, new array list. Do I want to? And so in which case, I feel like actually it would be better to have a new user callback method. So we're going to have that as on query. And we're getting some, because this is going to change. So we're getting some query back. So let's do void on add on upsert. In fact, and that's just going to return a user. Like so. Then we can use that here. And I think we're golden. Cool, okay. So, like I said, we have now an issue down here because we need to update our interface, which is being used by the Authentication Manager and is course no longer correct. And we can override public void on user, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, that looks healthier. And that's now going to be on query. Ooh. Okay, so basically what we've got going on here is, where is it? We've successfully added a user, and we are yeah, I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm gonna don't need that anymore, as we're only using it in that one place. So we have successfully uploaded the user. We've updated the current maximum user ID, and we've used the callback to go back to our Authentication Manager and say, yep, that worked successfully. Congrats, you're well done. For our errors, we are going to use the toaster. So send error. Basically all we're going to do there. I'm pretty sure that needs context as well, doesn't it? Yep. So we've on upserting a user when we register, we can now say, right, that user is registered, that user is in the system. We've successfully logged in terms of the authentication service. So now we just need to log it, actually pass that through and say, right, we've logged in now. This is our user object, which we have got back. Essentially what we've done is we've converted a login register data object into a user object. We've gone to try and upsert it, and as long as it comes back through here, it's been successful. So we can then actually use that object as the kind of setup, like, you know, that's our user information. So at this point, basically, we need to have some triggers to say, well, we've successfully logged in. We obviously don't want the user to have to go through the registration process or the login process every time they open the app. We also need to save some sort of identifier to know that we are who we say we are. In a production environment, this is where you'd start looking at tokens and that sort of thing. But for our purposes, all we're going to do is use Android's data storage to store the user ID of the user that's logged in and a flag to say that they are in fact logged in. I feel like that's more than enough for this purpose, for this sort of educational purpose. So let's do that. We're going to do that using the shared preferences. I feel like that is the most obvious place to put this. So we're going to say, yeah, I think that makes sense. So we're gonna get ourselves a shared preferences. Oh, thank you. And that's going to be get shared preferences, and the like, what are we going to say? We're going to call it like login now. Sure. And pretty sure, I can't remember. It's the mode. I'm pretty sure it's just 0. We'll create an editor. Cool. And then we can add in our information. So because we've gone through the login process, because it's all been successful, we know that we can the data in that user object is the data that we want to store. So we want to store the ID, because then we can query the database to get that information back at any time. And then also need to set a flag just to say, look, we are logged in. So let's do editor dot Boolean. We're going to call that is logged in, and the answer is going to be true. And we're going to put an int user ID, and that's going to be get ID. Cool, there we go. So that's all saved, that's all working. I'm happy with that. And what would we do next? Well, we'd obviously, after we've done that, we would then go through to the next activity. So the next activity being the feed. So where are we? Oh yeah, so we'll do context, start activity, and we will create a new intent, and that will be, never remember, yeah, from where you're going. So context to where we're going to, which is going to be the feed. Cool. And so that will trigger a new activity on top of the registration activity that we were working on and the user just logged into. Okay, so we've got the code now. 8302110. Log in. And there you go. We are now logged into our home fragment that is obviously just what was automatically generated, but we'll worry about that shortly. What we're way more interested in is to check to see on the web if that information has now come through as we would like it to. So if we go into the CloudDB and we have a look at data entries, Barker, user search, there we are. One Zachary, or one username Zach with display name Mr. Zachary, and the UID and everything all set up as we are expecting. So brilliant, that has worked, which of course we kind of knew has worked because we've got through to the home fragment activity, so it must have worked. Next up, okay, excellent. So back on the main, we are now going to essentially repeat the process for the login path, and then we will attempt the login path and show that that's working as well. So in our login, we've already made the changes here in that we are sending the data into the login process, and that the activity manager is kind of happy. So it's here essentially that we say, right, at the moment we're going to say sign in result, get the user, and that's going to give us this user, which we do actually want because that's going to give us the UID. We now need to search our database for the matching user and get that back and basically do the same thing here, but we don't have the user yet. That's what's going on here. So what I would like to do is we need to have a look in the Cloud Manager. Now, I know we've got a search sort of functionality that we've already put together. Query users using a query. So we are going to build that up, basically. We were just doing that, but we're going to get rid of that now. So we are going to have cloud DB manager, isn't it? DB manager dot query users, and that is a cloud DB query for user. So new dot equal to. Now I've got to remember how we do this. So we that is where we defined it. This is the best example in our snapshot where we add the subscription. Yeah. Where class. There we go. This is going to be basically what we want anyway. So let's just copy this. And where UID is equal to user.get UID. Okay. And that's going to be kind of the next query. We're going to get that back on our on query. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure that the user is unique. So we only want to be able to return. We only want to return one user, and I think we'll throw an error if there's actually more than one user found with that UID, because that kind of presents a problem. Problem that shouldn't have been possible, but it's a problem that, you know, it's an unhappy path. So we'll do if user list dot well, is it length count size is greater than 1. Greater than 1 or less than oh no, yeah, so wait a minute. If it's not equal to 1, we've got an issue. So we're gonna throw out toast. Send error message, context, error, user not unique. Not very user-friendly error message, but that'll do for now. However, if it is the right size, we can basically then get the user out and do all this. So this in itself kind of becomes a separate thing. Yeah, it's fine. So user list dot get 0. Yep, there we go. And then we can do all the shared preference stuff. So let's put that as a private method. Say login detail. And we're going to take a user. And we're also going to have proceed to feed. Perfect. So that should, in theory, work as the login path. So if we reload the app now, so I think that's a good place to end it for today. Next week, we are going to be looking at how we're going to use the Cloud Database Manager in a more generic way, so we can start using that for the different types of objects that we have, not just the user object. We'll then also start looking at how we can put together a news feed style thing as you would get on Twitter, and start writing an app, really. I mean, we've basically taking it to the next level and making use of the tools that we have put together so far. So that's the plan for that. Of course, as always, if you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and like, and also leave a comment down below about how you're getting on with your own serverless Android app. We are also, of course, always live on Twitch every Thursday at 2 p.m. And that's when we actually record these sessions. So that will be the first time you get to see the next session if you want to take part. But we're also on other social media as well. So do check out anywhere that you can search for Dev with Zachary. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Twitch, I'm on Twitter, all the T's. And of course, other places as well, like dev.to and other blogging platforms. So go check that out. And once again, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.